Welcome to Decoding Growth, where unfiltered conversations and bold ideas are reshaping retirement. Each episode cuts through the noise to reveal the strategies and unexpected alliances driving real industry change, one conversation at a time. Here are your hosts, Lisa Kottler and Will Prest.
Welcome back to another episode of Decoding Growth. I'm Lisa Kottler. I'm here with my business partner, Will Prest. And look, let's be honest. We know that a lot of record keepers talk about serving the small business market, but it's not happening. 9 out of 10 employers today still do not offer a plan. And we know that 9 out of 10 employers also have less than 20 employees. So sure, there's a bit of a correlation there. It is a tough market to have margins, to be profitable, but we have someone here today who's figured it out. And we're excited to have Dan Beck, the co-founder and CEO of 401 Go. So we'll dig into what it takes to prove it out here in this small business market, why others have failed, and really what it means to build with modern tech in a world that has still a lot of legacy systems. So Dan has a really fascinating background, comes from outside the retirement plan industry, which I think why this is such a compelling story and conversation. And he's a serial entrepreneur. He's built in e-commerce, TV, consumer goods, etc. So he really brings that outside perspective. So we're super excited to have him here today. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. You're too kind. I wouldn't say we figured it out. I think we are figuring it out. We're working on it. So, we do believe that we have some unique ideas on how we approach this segment of the market. But yeah, we're definitely, we figured out a few good things, and there's still, I'm sure, a lot more to go. So.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, you're right, but you definitely have touched on something and are really but let's dig in on that. I think it would be great to start a little bit with your origin story because I think that's probably a big part and a big reason as to the success that you've had to date. And we presume we'll continue to have. But as I said in the open, you've built businesses in consumer goods, e-commerce. That's a very different type of business and business model, especially having to go direct to consumer. So, what do you think? What is it about that experience? What did you learn there that you think is helpful as you now started in this world?
Yeah. So for me, the reason that I've started a number of different businesses and also very different sectors and industries is really kind of an internal drive toward curiosity. I just love figuring things out, and some of the time, especially when you experience something, you're like, oh, it wasn't that good. I wonder why. Could it be better? And it takes, I think, an entrepreneur or kind of that mindset to really innovate. And some of the time, the other thing too that we try to do even within our company is as we hire somebody, we want them to be extremely vocal from day one with what's not working. Like, what are we not doing well? Because what happens over time is by being exposed to those things that just aren't working, they become commonplace and you forget that they don't work or they don't make sense. And so I think that was really the ability that we had was coming from outside the industry. We could step in. And I remember as a business owner, the first couple times that I tried to set up a 401k for my businesses, I was like, this doesn't make sense. The way that the industry describes profit sharing makes no sense to a business owner. Cause you're like, so wait, but last year I wasn't profitable, but I'd still have to make a profit sharing contribution. Like, we weren't profitable. That doesn't make sense. So just little nuances like that of, when we approach this industry, I approached it from the perspective of a customer, of a business owner. And that's really kind of the origin story. My brother, who is our CTO and one of the co-founders, he and we've been building businesses together for well over a decade. Everything from, my first career was I was a TV producer. Then we did consumer products, overseas manufacturing. We had a food truck for a couple of years. I was no good at that. So we've done a lot of different things. I still have another business that does construction and design and architectural products that are imported from Italy. So we've done a lot of different things, but really kind of at the core of all this is trying to find the best way to do something to create the best experience. And so I think my e-commerce background, especially, was very valuable for what we've been trying to accomplish with 401ks for small businesses, because it's about reducing friction. A lot of times, the determining factor for whether I buy one product versus another is the experience, the unboxing experience. It's the experience of checking out on the website, of it arriving at your door. And so we've seen a tremendous amount of innovation in like that e-commerce space, where with my phone and 5 minutes, I can have package on my doorstep, from Walmart or from Amazon. The logistics and all the back office administration and the complexity and everything that goes into making that happen has taken decades to build. And so when we went through this pain point of trying to set up a 401k for a couple of our small businesses, we were at about 30 employees. And I remember the first time just thinking, once I learned what the word fiduciary was, I decided as a small business owner, I didn't want to be a fiduciary. You feel enough responsibility already with employees and making sure they're taken care of and their families are taken care of. To take on that additional burden of being a fiduciary it was a little nerve wracking. And so we tried on 2 different occasions in different businesses to set up a 401k. And both times I was just flabbergasted at how complex and messy it was, especially because some of the other HCM solutions or the payroll and HR solutions that we were using were far more modernized and automated and a lot easier. And so naturally, again, with just that curious mindset, having experienced this pain point a couple different times, we realized, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here where there's friction. There's going to be smoke, there's going to be a fire, there's going to be, the hurt and headache and frustration. And those are opportunities that entrepreneurs are looking for. And so we spent about a year evaluating it and realized that there's something we could do. We could bring value to this industry, and that's what we've been focused on for the last 5 or 6 years.
Which is such a great story because you had your own problem in your own small business. You saw the complexity. You've touched on so many things that Will and I are out preaching all the time about. We have to really to drive engagement, to drive usage and adoption, we have to make things easier, more intuitive, simpler, and just use English, plain English in speaking. So I love that you had your own problem in your business and then saw this need. You came at it from the problem set. I think what happens often is that new technology comes along, whether it's been like the digitization of our world over the last, 20 years or so. Now we have AI, we've had blockchain for a number of years. We'll see a new shiny toy and go, "Oh, what can we go do with that?" And come at it from the technology going backwards versus what is the problem and going forward. What are some of the things you think that the industry was missing as it relates to that problem set and the challenges that you had as a small business owner?
I think the biggest challenge is that it's these financial service products, frankly, all financial service products are being underutilized by the individuals that need the most help. And so for us, it wasn't, I didn't want to set up a 401k because I just wanted to give away more money. I'd love to say that's the case. I mean, frankly, I do really care about the people that I've always been able to work alongside. And I feel like, especially in small business, they become more like family. I remember many end of year inventory accounts where I'm in there, first part of January, while every other business is closed, and I've got, my office manager. She's bringing some of her sons to help count inventory, and it's a family affair. It very much is small business, and so first and foremost, we wanted to help individuals, and really where this problem was magnified is I'd have warehouse employees come and say, "Hey, can I get a payday advance?" And so naturally, I know as an employer, one, I want to help them, but two, also if they're showing up to work and they're thinking about a busted transmission or some bill that they're going to have a hard time paying, then they're not focused on work. They're also more likely to maybe borrow some money from the company, with the intent of repaying it back later on, that, under the table, that sort of thing. And so we wanted to solve for that. And, so when an employee would come, I'd give them a Dave Ramsey book and I'd say, "Okay, I'm going to help you out, but I'm going to ask you in a couple of weeks." And you're opening up that opportunity for me to say, "How are you doing financially?" Because those are sometimes areas where you don't want to tread as, kind of that relationship in business. I saw this as an opportunity to help them. And I thought, what's a better way to get somebody saving for retirement if you can say, "I can match your funds." So we did a QACA QACA safe harbor match for our first plan. And I thought that was a great way to kind of encourage them to save. And so we made that a part of our mission statement, the 401 Go mission statement. We don't talk about, closing the access gap or a lot of these kind of obvious surface level problems. When we focus on it, the why of why we're doing this is we're trying to ignite that desire in somebody who doesn't have it. It's to overcome that first dollar hurdle. So I love to tell the story of Cameron. He is somebody that he's now 22. He's working for the third business of mine. So he's, I've known him since he was 15. His dad is one of my warehouse managers. And when he was 15, summer break, he'd come and work in the warehouse. And so I've known him for a long time. And once we set up the 401k, he was somebody that utilized it right away, jumped on the wagon and immediately was very successful. He now has well over 50,000 in his 401k. And he's really changed the way that he thinks about money. And I chalk that up to the fact that he had, that we helped him kind of nudge him over that hurdle. And so that's really the way that we've approached this industry. All of our engineers read a book called Nudge 2.0. Where it talks about kind of choice architecture and how do we get people to do what we want them to do without doing it for them. And that's, I think, some of the conflict that the industry sees between, defined benefit and defined contribution. In defined contribution, it's, kind of that general idea of, hey, we're going to give this to you, but we're going to let you figure out how to do it. Whereas defined benefit, I feel like it removes too much of that control or that responsibility from the beneficiary, that employee. And so we're trying to find where's that happy ground, where's that middle ground where we can get somebody to do what we want them to, but still allow them to make the choice themselves. Because when you do that, we're teaching them how to make the right choice rather than just saying, we're going to do it for you. And so I think that's really one of the biggest shifts in mindset that I think we had when we started 401Go is, the way that we want to engage with these users. And so for us, we took a very holistic approach to it where it's not just about closing an access gap, creating an account. It's not the mechanics or the how or the what, but it's more the why. And so that's really been our focus is how do we drive and improve these outcomes? And that's where we decided it's not just a tech-based approach. It's not just a human-based advisor approach. It's combining the best of everything that we can find and then allowing that individual to still make the choice themselves.
That's a great answer, Dan. How do you think about distribution and getting the word out there, making sure that more small businesses understand what they can offer and get not only the mechanics, but the why behind it? And I want to go on to one other level, which is, it seems like you have really learned how to work with advisors, but they're complex for a lot of intermediaries. So could you talk about your distribution and how you work alongside advisors?
That it's taken me quite a while to figure out really the advisor landscape. And I'm still to this day, there's things that I'm, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Initially I thought an advisor was an advisor. Then I find out there's private wealth advisors. There's, your typical fee-based advisor. You've got retirement plan advisors, and they all have very different ideas of the way that these products should be delivered, distribution. And so it's interesting of the, 1,800 or so advisor relationships that we have at 401Go, about 60% of them are private wealth advisors. And I think that's pretty astounding because it shows that we've been able to galvanize a group of advisors that have oftentimes shied away from this or they've been excluded from these types of financial service products. And so I think, again, a lot of that comes down to the mindset and the challenge that we found when we really started to evaluate the industry is that your core retirement plan advisor, the incentives don't align for them to really go after this SMB space. And so, it's not that they're greedy or that they're lazy. It's just, it doesn't make sense economically. And this is a job. You've got to do what makes sense economically. And so for us, we had to realign those incentives. So first and foremost, when, we started looking and talking to advisors and they say, oh, it takes 6 to 8 weeks to set up a 401k plan and you're talking to 4 or 5 different parties, we realized, okay, that's very complex. That's messy. Naturally, you need to be well compensated to go through all that work. Well, what if we could make it, I joke because I remember early on, I was traveling with the team to, I think it was a Napa conference down in Vegas. And we're renting a car at the airport. And it took about 30 minutes and there was a bunch of paperwork and everything else. And I just thought, you know what, we figured out how to set up a 401k faster than they could rent us a car. And so, it was, again, kind of that idea of if we can reduce friction, maybe we can realign these incentives. And so once we did that, we did have retirement plan advisors that said, okay, I'm interested in this segment of the market. And I think that was also further fueled by the fact that you have a lot of states now, I think we're up to 20, 21, that have passed legislation which require employers of a certain size to offer this benefit. And so if you're a retirement plan advisor, suddenly you're going, okay, well, all this new market opportunity is coming from a segment that I really have never gone after. I don't have solutions to solve for. And so we've kind of approached the industry both through the lens of a retirement plan advisor as more of, as well as that generalist or that private wealth advisor.
Can you dig a little bit more into, as you learn about advisors, what are a couple of the key friction points that we're keeping advisors away from getting in front of small businesses, which is where the bulk of the opportunity seems to lie?
The biggest one is just the time and the complexity involved. It requires a very good knowledge of this product, understanding what's the role of a third-party administrator, what's the role of a record keeper, what are 316 services, what's the value of me being a 338 versus leveraging maybe an outside 338. And so the knowledge that's required for this, a lot of the paperwork, the billing, those are some of the issues when, a lot of times it's the retirement desk at the RIA that will determine whether a generalist can do 401ks or not. And the retirement desk is looking at it from a compliance lens oftentimes. And so we had a lot of things that we had to solve for to kind of reduce that friction and create this opportunity for advisors that maybe, previously weren't able to do this. And so those are some of the things. The other, in terms of aligning incentives, when you have all these different, hands in the pie, you've got a third party administrator that's charging, $1,500 for a plan document, and then the record keeper that has a $500 setup fee. The advisor's really left to charge an asset based fee, which on a startup plan is zero. And so even if it's, let's say, small, couple $100,000, there's a little bit of money to be had there, but it's not even worth the time for the advisor to invoice it. And so we've eliminated all of that. We manage the, kind of the billing, that aspect. We allow the advisors to upload very complicated fee schedules. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to somebody at Napa this year, and he just came up, he's like, I love 401 Go. And whenever I hear that, I always want to know why. Number one, it's always, they mention a name. They're like, I love working with, Jared, Kelly, Sue, whoever. They name somebody within the company. And I love that because we're a tech company, but we're talking about people. This is about relationships. But for this particular individual, he mentioned a few people, but he says, you know what I love? You guys get me paid. And like, it seems silly, but it's a frustration with so many other providers. So like within a few months have set up 50 plans on your platform, and I don't ever have to worry about getting paid. I upload my fee schedule. Some of the time it's, flat fee to help them get set up. If it's a startup plan, if it's an existing plan with over 1 million assets, they'll use more of a graded schedule. And the fact that we can accommodate all of that on our platform, where within 10 or 15 minutes, they can set up a plan, they can connect it to the client's payroll system, they can apply any number of fee schedules that they upload. The documents that they need to have executed, they load into our platform as well. So now the back office has copies of that. Everybody's happy. If you can make everybody happy, then naturally, I like to say this, having come from the e-commerce space, I have a hate relationship with Amazon. It is so hard, for a third party seller or a vendor to Amazon to work with them. They're bullies in so many ways. But I still buy from Amazon. And the reason why is they just make it so damn easy. I can say, Alexa, and boom, it's on my doorstep. So for that reason, we know that if we can reduce the friction and create that seamless experience that you get, through e-commerce, then we can help to shift the way that the advisors think about this. But we're rather than kind of a hate relationship, we want them to love us. So we want them to love us. We want it to be frictionless. And I think we're doing a good job of doing that so far.
So you hit on something really important there. Well, several things, but one that I'll go to first is that the you're right. I mean, I wish we could, as an industry, look at other industries that have done things really well, like an Amazon, and how can we take those learnings and apply it to our world? Because you're right, people are used to being able to click a button on their phone and something shows up at their doorstep in a short period of time, as you said. And so they take that same mindset, that consumer mindset, to the 401k. So it sounds like you guys are being very thoughtful in how you build it, and it is very reliant upon technology. But you said something in your last answer about how you have great people, and you hear that a lot from advisors and probably your employer clients as well. Because as you know, and I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times, there is, to some degree, it's a misnomer. Well, there's a spectrum, I should say, but there's like, oh, these fintechs, it's all tech. There's no service. There's no human in the loop. Oh, they're not going to give you, you're on your own if you go work with one of those. So speak to that a little bit about how you've changed that, and how do you strike that balance too between being profitable but yet also recognizing humans need to be in the loop.
You're right, and it's a matter of understanding at what point we need a human in the loop and what that human is doing. And at too many firms, and even some of the other fintechs, where they were able to. It took us about 2 years to just get version one of our product. So that's a pretty significant investment to make. A lot of 2 years of coding, a lot of research, payroll, and everything else. And so some of our competitors, they instead started with legacy systems. So that allowed them to go to market quicker and kind of focus on how do we provide a good solution. But it also meant that you start with legacy systems, you start with legacy thinking and legacy problems and processes. And so the challenge that you have there is when you look at the human involvement, or the amount of hours that go into just back office functions that add no value to a 401k, then that robs the bottom line. And so from a business standpoint, you go, okay, well, how do we be more efficient? We're going to apply AI and chatbots and everything else. And the first place that generally gets rolled out is, where's there a lot of headcount? There's oftentimes a lot of headcount in customer service. Why do you have customer service? Well, because these platforms aren't great. So you got to call in because they're confusing and difficult to use. And so by taking a holistic approach and looking at it from, a technology standpoint, that human involvement standpoint, we were able to apply that human element where it needed to be. And so we took a very different approach. And again, by having a fully proprietary system, it allows us to do non-discrimination testing and compliance checks and everything on an ongoing basis. We analyze ticket volume, for our client success team quite heavily. And over 50% of our tickets are system generated, meaning it's the system looking at problems, because oftentimes you don't really know till the end of the year whether a plan's going to fall to certain non-discrimination tests. But you can get a pretty good indication, at the start of the year, that there may be a problem. And generally a business owner wants to know that sooner rather than later, or their tax planner wants to know that sooner rather than later, so they can kind of consider alternate scenarios that are going to help them achieve their objectives. And so by taking a proactive approach, it's the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We've got those ounces of prevention throughout the organization at multiple levels. And so I do love that you can call any number you find on our website, the front end or the back end portal. And we've designed it in such a way that it's going to, that number is going to connect you with the right person. And so, especially if it's a phone number that's in our system, and someone's going to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Lisa, we know who you're working with." So our CSMs already have that information at their fingertips, and we can solve those problems. The other thing too is we can reduce, by monitoring that ticket volume. We know where are there issues with the platform. We allow loans and hardship withdrawals and everything else that can all be driven through the platform or from our iOS or Android apps. And so we've really simplified that process there. But we found, there's still little headaches, a few headaches here and there. People haven't been filling this out. And so we can kind of analyze that ticket volume to make better improvements to the platform. And as we do that, that obviously reduces the amount of people that are calling in. And so the idea is we want our people focused on really providing value. And you don't add value when it's behind the scenes, when it's back office administration. And so for that reason, we've automated as much of that as we possibly can. But we have kind of a saying internally, and we market this as well, as we automate everything but relationships. That's the most important part. Nothing beats my phone can, I get so many texts and notifications coming in on a constant basis. I mean, I've heard, our phones are going off right now, even during these pings, and kind of it's stressful almost. And so in a way, you just kind of shut it out. And technology clearly isn't helping us overcome some of these hurdles. But when somebody walks in my door and says, "Hey, Dan, notice you're not enrolled in the 401k. Is there a reason why?" So if that's an advisor or whatever, then boom, we've overcome that first dollar hurdle. And so that's just the way we've approached is humans still have tremendous value to add, even with AI, I think even more now than ever before. We crave those relationships. We crave those interactions. And frankly, when you call in, I called into a call center yesterday, and they're like, "Oh, it's our AI. Just say what you want." And I don't even know how to talk to it. I'm like, "Representative." oh, I can't help you. And it's so frustrating because at that moment, if you say representative, you want to talk to a representative. And so our goal is let's do everything we can to make it so you don't need to call in. But when you do call in, we're going to have an actual human answer.
What do the existing retirement plan companies miss about the small business segment? You talked a bit about it, but I'd love like for you to pull those threads together because it's very interesting. You're obviously doing something very different. You've just talked about it, but what's like the takeaway lesson now that you've been in this for a while and you're a small business person?
The one thing that I found quite common in the industry is you have experts working with experts. And so they can kind of shift complexity, they can shift value either way, either record keeper or third party administrator or an HR professional. In a small business, that business owner is good at plumbing. They're good at, for me, distribution, overseas manufacturing, whatever it may be, but they know nothing about this industry. So when you say you need to go get a fidelity bond, they're like, what? Why? You're my provider. Why don't you do that? And so we shift, the industry shifts too much of that responsibility onto the business because they expect that there's an HR professional there. In the SMB space, you don't have an HR professional. The other thing too,
So you're making it easy for, just to pause for a second, you're making it really easy for the business owner who's running their business. They're good at what they do, whatever those tasks are. But our industry has so much complexity. We've been inadvertently or on purpose shifting it to them, which of course just creates huge walls and lots of friction. Did I get that right?
absolutely. And that's one thing that you talk to my operations team or whatever. I say this all too often. I'm like, I want to own all of the friction. I joke that, hey, if an advisor wants to send a plan our way, everyone else is like, you got to fill out this form and do this and do this. So they have very prescribed processes for everything. And I've always told advisors, like, how do I work with you? I'm like, however you want. Like, if you want to send smoke signals, I'm gonna hire somebody and put them on the roof and teach them how to read smoke signals. So by owning the friction, we are now incentivized to solve those issues by pushing that friction onto somebody else, whether it's another provider in kind of the 401k ecosystem, or it's the plan sponsor or the employee. Sadly, they get a lot of that burden from a cost standpoint, from an operation standpoint, and a lot of the complexity. They are the least suited to solve those friction points. So by us owning it, we're incentivized to fix it. We see it. It's a better experience.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, like I'm just almost dumbfounded to hear someone in our industry saying this, that you really want to embrace the friction and take it on and take that out of the hands of the other folks because there's so much friction. We still have to fax things.
Well, think about it. You know what's interesting is two key words change the whole thing, which is Lisa and I have been out there talking about innovation and friction and trying to remove it, but by you saying you want to own the friction,
Yes.
then it's your responsibility. So you're looking for it and then you're owning it so that your customers can do what they do best and offer this benefit and not be blocked from offering the benefit.
I think the other challenge too is, again, just being in the industry, you assume that all benefits are created equally, and they're not. This is the most complex benefit that an employer can offer their employees. And the reason why is, like with the health benefit, you set it up, you configure it maybe once a year. When you have a new employee, you set up that deferral out of their paycheck. Um, but for a 401k, you've got loans. They can change the amount they want to save. And so every payroll, you could be changing an employee's. I mean, there's a lot of administrative work that goes into this. And I think we forget that. We're like, well, this is just another benefit. And so again, it's not that, we just don't have that empathy that is required to work with a small business owner. I think that just came more naturally for me because I was in those shoes. And I sometimes have to be very careful, especially in conversations like this. We throw around, the industry terms that don't make sense outside of this industry. And I think that's actually in some ways a benefit to coming from outside the space, but I find myself kind of falling into those same traps. It's helpful whenever I'm fundraising or I'm talking to investors or outside partners or stakeholders. I have to be very careful about the vernacular that I use. And again, it's just a refresher for me that, okay, you're clearly getting familiar enough with this industry that you're going to start falling into some of those old traps. And so the other thing too that I think is pretty exciting is when you look at like our client success management team and our general support team, I'd say less than 10 or 15% actually come from the industry. And I know some people are like, oh, that's terrible. That means you're gonna make mistakes and provide poor service. And that's not the case. We're hiring people based off of their interaction capabilities, not their technical understanding of the industry. Because generally, the type of person that craves kind of that technical understanding, they're generally not good people. People, you know what I'm saying? That their human interactions are oftentimes lacking.
Right, right, right. And you be the best one to communicate it to someone.
Yeah, it's like when you've got a big, messy problem, usually the person at the TPA firm that's going to solve that is the one that, is oftentimes kind of, next to the broom closet, a little bit nerdy or whatever, but they love complexity and they love, reading technical documentation and everything else. And so we do have those specialists within our firm that can provide that assistance when necessary, but they're always doing it in concert with somebody who is very empathetic, who's very customer centric. And so that's where we're able to speak in lay terms and, have kind of that very friendly, personal experience that oftentimes is lacking from, these big established names.
Yeah, no, that I think that's great. I think we should start a tip jar here, and like when people start using all the vernacular and the acronyms, the GOPS, EPS, and the SEPs, and all, we should like throw money in because that's something Will and I both have talked about separately before we even came together. And it's one of the trends in our report is that human-centered design drives engagement, and it's all about creating the simple, intuitive interactions, whether it's on an app or a web and just as we said earlier, speaking plain English, so I think that's great. As I listen to you talk and describe, again, love the outside perspective and the outside experience that you bring to this, and I think you're right, having the mix of employees at your firm that have the industry expertise and those that don't, I mean, it's a great combination because you do need that outside perspective. The challenge that Will and I have seen, I don't know if it's a challenge, but we hear some criticisms from time to time as we've been out talking about our workplace retire tech map and our trends. We hear this notion that like, well, those fintechs, they're not real businesses or, none of them are making any money yet. Or, there's just these ways to sort of throw stones, I think. And look, maybe some of those are people think it's legitimate doubts. I don't know. But what would you say to folks that are looking at some of the fintechs that way?
I think a lot of the time, the individuals within the industry, we're typically dealing with, from an investment standpoint, public markets where unit economics are different. These are, companies that have to make a profit. There's a lot of rules that govern public companies. Um, but when you're innovating and you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, it can be quite capital intensive. And this is really where a lot of times you can find experts that are uh, very profound, been in the industry for a long time within our space, but they tend to think of venture capital or startups from the same lens as like a public company. And the difference between even a bootstrap company. So every company that my brother and I built prior to this one was bootstrapped. It's very different to run a bootstrap company than one that's venture backed. And so I think that's one of the benefits to us is that more of our heritage, if you will, comes from that more traditional, like, I can't stay in business unless I make money. And so we've been very
I'm gonna
careful.
use the best fundraiser, right?
Yes, yes. And so we've had to be very careful about, um, you know, the the way that I've approached venture capital this time because they're about growth. And sometimes it was growth at all costs. And so people who do throw stones, in many instances, they're well justified because a lot of these firms, the challenge with venture capital is almost the valuations that you're applying are valuations that they're expected to get to in 12, 24, 4 years, whatever that time period is, from months to years. And sadly, a lot of firms fail to do that. And so you find these firms that will be given unicorn status. That's essentially at some stage of funding. They get, they're worth more than $1 billion, but they don't actually get to providing that type of value to where they can then go public or something of that nature. So unfortunately, in this space,
Sets them up for failure in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
in this space, you do find a lot of companies that fell early and also fell very late. And so, innovation's messy. Innovation's very capital intensive. and it requires a different market. And that's where, venture capital, private equity makes more sense than, kind of what you typically see within public markets. And so the money that we're getting from investors, we're not necessarily paying it back. It's not a loan. It's, their hope is we're worth, 50 million today, and that we're going to be worth 3 billion in a few years from now. And the chances of that happening from the companies that make it through those early stages of seed and Series A or whatever, it's 10%. And so it's a 1 in 10 chance for these venture capital firms. And so it's just a very different business mindset. And it's challenging because you have these very entrenched companies. It's like, whenever I'm having a call with an incumbent in the industry, I say, tell me about Prudential. And it's like, oh, they were founded in 18 something something or whatever. And so it's a very different picture having a conversation and working with that type of firm versus what we're doing. And so, you have to think about it from a completely different perspective. It was something that was even hard for me. I remember some of our first, pro forma financials that I set forth are like, you're going to be cash flow positive too soon. That means you're not growing aggressively enough. And so I've had to kind of change my mindset a little bit to be more palatable to this venture space than the way I previously operated businesses.
Well, I think that's it's really fascinating, and I think from what I think Will at where we sit and what we've experienced, because we've both been senior execs at these legacy firms, but we've also both done startup. And I think there's a misunderstanding from legacy firms. Not everyone. This is a very generalized statement, so I'm not calling anyone out specifically, but it's just that there seems to be a lack of understanding of the stages, the evolution of early stage. And you pointed that out a bit in your last comments about, whether you're bootstrapped, you move, because you start with a hypothesis. And like you saw, okay, this industry, I had problems as a small business owner. It was challenging to try to get anything done. There was a lot of friction. It was complicated. And so you set out to solve, you had that hypothesis, like, I think this can be solved, and you set out to do it. Well, it doesn't mean that your first step out of the gate that you're gonna have all the bells and whistles, right? You have to start small, you iterate, you get some feedback from prospects, customers, you build on that, you keep iterating. It takes time. It takes time to get to some traction. It's sort of a, 0 to 10. It takes a while to get through, 10 being all the bells and whistles. And I think that people in our industry often look at it and expect you to be further along, not understanding that there is this progression happens, and not all retire techs are the same. They're not all in the same stage. And so applying that sort of, you know, generalized view and expecting you to be more or something, maybe not more, but different than you are, it's just really frustrating. That's where Will and I've been trying to come in and try to help make those connections and have that understanding.
And I think it's just a natural. I think some industries are more suited for innovation than others. This industry is very risk adverse, as it should be. We're dealing with people's wealth and retirement, slow to move, slow to adapt. It requires, healthy amount of kind of, I'd call that legacy thinking. I don't mean that in any sort of derogatory way. It's essentially saying, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And you could say that for this industry, but what we're trying to do is, look at it and say, okay, well, maybe it's not broken, but could it be better? Could we get somebody, saving more earlier? Is that going to change the outcomes? The reason that the states are getting involved is because sadly, the industry hasn't been able to solve this. And so, if you're California, you've got all these people approaching retirement and they're not ready. That becomes an economic burden on that state, the country, those, taxpayers. And so government wants to get involved to try to reduce that burden. And so that's kind of a signal that there's some inefficiencies within this industry. One of the ways that I think about it is, in experimentation, you find these opportunities, you can find a better way of doing something, but experimentation also results in a lot of failure. Furthermore, kind of a term I like is constraints are often the enemy of creativity. If you've got an excessive number of constraints, it reduces the amount of creative solutions you come up with. In business, cash is probably the biggest constraint. And so, I love applying frameworks and models and everything to growth. And so with every business I've, EOS, entrepreneur operating system, there's these different frameworks. And with almost all these frameworks, there's a very strong cash component because that's the death of a lot of businesses. It's not necessarily they're not profitable. It's that they fall behind the cash curve or there's cash implications. And so it's nice in a way to just toss out that constraint and say, give me a few years, let me experiment, let me fail, let me try something that hasn't been tried before. And if we can produce positive results, this is going to transform the industry. And that's the beauty of innovation.
That is the innovator's mindset, right? That it's test, learn, tweak. It's all about the learning cycle and finding out that combination lock. Whereas large ongoing businesses are all about scale, and it would be nice to sort of have a mind meld where large organizations are continually really listening to their customer and what's happening in the marketplace to find friction that they've probably missed before or it didn't matter as much. But that's really your lifeblood, right? That's how you find the friction that then gives you these new opportunities.
Yes. And it's interesting too. I think it would surprise most people. A lot of these big names and many of the incumbents in this space, they know that this is a pitfall for them. They know that they're going to struggle to innovate. So how do they do it? They launch CVCs, corporate venture capital firms. So I'm in talks right now with one that has, all their LPs are names that you are all very, very familiar with, very large established public companies in this space. And it's a way for them to kind of tap into that innovation, through some leveraged means where, obviously you can read, about the innovation in the space or whatever, but you're a little bit closer when you're a shareholder in firms that are innovating. And so that's one of the ways they try to tap into that. And vice versa. I think it's really imperative for us to tap into what these firms have going well for them, which is that compliance mindset and a lot of the structure and the rigor and the scale. And so it's kind of, and that's, I think the most fun that I have in what I do is taking kind of these businesses through these iterations where in these early stages, like, let's experiment, let's throw out the rule book, let's remove the constraints, and then slowly pivoting to it's okay, we need scale, we need a slightly different mindset. And so early on, we did an accelerator program and we were kind of at a stage where honestly it didn't make a lot of sense to do like a typical like Y Combinator or that sort of accelerator. We already had success. We already had really good traction. But this was one that was sponsored by Allianz Life and Security and Financial. And so I saw this as an opportunity to tap into those large organizations to have access to their C-suite and to talk about the problems that they see and the challenges and really, extract some value out of those big firms that oftentimes is missing in venture firms where some of the time you look at it like that's sloppy, that's wild, that's messy. The move fast, break shit mindset. You don't want that when you're dealing with people's money. And so it requires, I think, a certain balance that is, very different in this industry versus if I'm doing marketing tech or some other venture backed startup.
It's great to hear that you were working with when the incubator with Allianz Life and Securian. That's right up the road for me, and we know those companies well. So it's again, it kind of gets to that mindset because startups aren't little versions of these big companies, are they? They're just in a completely different stage. And the big companies are in a different stage. And Lisa and I see this evolving playbook, which is kind of coming out in all these different podcasts about if we could take the 2 points of view, they both have attributes and resources they need. So how does that come together, right? I was just speaking in front of a very large audience of a record keeper this week, and I pointed out to them, you have all this scale, you have all these plans, you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of participants. Maybe you could look at the map and think about some new partnerships because they want what you have and you want what they have. It's just
We want scale, we want distribution. Yep.
how do you find the match that's great for both sides?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because and we touched on it earlier, but or I think you did, Dan. But look, we all recognize you made the point that there's a lot of risk. These are people's money, their futures. So understandably, there has to be some risk aversion or at least, manage the risk really well. But we also see like a career risk. Folks who at these legacy firms may not want to take a stand, if you will. Like why would I go talk about these bold ideas and go execute on those when, as we all know, there's going to be a lot more failure than success. And so that's just the way innovation works. Or maybe there's a retirement risk in the sense that a lot of leaders are within few years of retirement. So again, why take these big, bold risks when you're almost at the finish line? So understanding all that, do you have any, I don't know if it's advice per se, but just any comments to those legacy firms as they consider innovation, as they consider strategic partnerships with a firm like yours? What would you say to them?
I think it's the probably the key is those strategic partnerships, and the reason is oftentimes it's more a function of environment than it is necessarily industry constraints or a lot of these things. And so when you come to a startup and there's a very different vibe, there is a very different feeling. You know that you can kind of go out on a limb, say something that maybe a little far out there and not be criticized for it, not worry that your job is at risk. And so to try to create those environments within these large established organizations, you can have success, but they need a lot of autonomy from the organization itself, because part of the organizational structure that gives them the scale that makes them these formidable entities is the fact that they have a very controlled environment where you do reduce kind of that internal risk, and so you do that through a lot of controls and systems and checks. But it's the same controls and systems that checks that impact the innovation. I remember in school we did a case study on 3M and Six Sigma and some of these other kind of operating protocols, and what they found is as they tried to implement like Six Sigma, it actually severely impacted over like a phase of 3 to 5 years or whatever that they were doing this, where the number of patents and innovation reduced significantly, because with Six Sigma, it's about like reducing errors and that sort of thing. Where if you're an innovative firm like 3M, you're trying to find new adhesives and new solutions, you do need to allow for failure. And so I think it's a challenge that is part of these organizations. And rather than fight it, I think it's better to partner with a firm that has that full autonomy to operate in a very different way than these larger, more established organizations. In some firms, they'll kind of have like these internal, I call them intrapreneurs, where they stay within inside the organization and they're given a lot of leeway. But oftentimes that just doesn't work well. They'll say, "Hey, we know we're not innovative enough. That's the flavor of the month." And so they're like, we're gonna invest $5 million and set up kind of an innovation group within here. And then 3 years later, there's a new change of management, or the board has a different idea, and then that firm evaporates overnight. Or sorry, that kind of internal organization evaporates overnight because of a larger strategic shift. And so I believe there's got to be full autonomy with that kind of innovative framework in place for that innovation to happen. And again, I think that we've seen this problem solved in other industries, in e-commerce and everything else, and so in a way, it's like Amazon. They use third parties for a lot of their distribution, and so but they also have their own internal distribution. So I think it's a multi-layered approach, really. How do we stimulate more innovation within the organization? What are ways that we can do that? And I think a lot of that means it requires you to look at the way the organization is structured, the reporting hierarchy. If it's very deep, you're going to limit innovation. If you can kind of make it easier for people who are on the front end to talk to like strategic, innovators within the organization, you can have more control. If there's a lot of layers, that's going to impact it. One of the things I love is sitting outside and kind of the bullpen. I do have a private office, but I want to spend as much of my time out amongst the team hearing these casual conversations or whatever, because they're the ones that are dealing with these problems. When I hear something come up over and over and over again, I can go to the engineering and say, "Hey, I keep hearing the CSMs talk about this. Like, maybe we need to look at that." And so it's impossible to do in these bigger organizations. And so, I think that's again the beauty of what we're doing. It's a great way to innovate. You partner with people who are just naturally better suited for that.
There's so many good things in that. Unfortunately, we're kind of coming to an end, but it does come back to that bumper sticker, which the best innovators get out from behind their desk and just hear what's really happening.
Yeah, get outside the building.
Talk to customers. Yes.
Steep link. Well, if we could just and thank you so much for your time today. This has been really fantastic.
This has been fun.
If we could ask you just one last question, what's been most surprising to you as you've come into this new industry now, into the 401k industry? What's been the most surprising thing since you've launched your company?
The industry's willingness to change, honestly. I think I approached it maybe a little bit jaded. And I think some of that is just the research where, some of our fintech competitors that we kind of evaluated as we were jumping into the space, while they didn't outright say it, there was kind of this idea of advisors do two things: they add fees and they add friction. And essentially saying tech can do it better. Anything you can do, I can do better type mentality. And then also, these are big, stodgy organizations. They don't want to change. And I found that isn't the case. Like, especially within the last year or two, I've had a large number of conversations with very established players that are wanting to do better. And so to me, it shows that they're not thinking about just the bottom line. They're not thinking about just the shareholder and how do we maximize profit. Yes, there are people within the organization and that's their job. But the ones that we're talking to, a lot of those kind of upper middle managers and the frontline forces, they care. They really care. Like, they want to help these small businesses. It's not that they don't want to, it's just they haven't been able to. And so it's fun to be able to remove some of those barriers and see what they do. And I've been buoyed up by the fact that it's a good industry with a lot of really incredible people that want to solve problems. And we just need to give them better tools to do that. And they will. And so that's the exciting thing, is we're kind of in this really fun stage of kind of bringing together incumbents within the space, as Lisa and others that are innovators, and saying, how do we improve this industry? And that's the thing that's most exciting for me, is it's an industry that's saying, yes, help us learn, help us improve. And there's a willingness there that I didn't think was initially there.
That is so great to hear. And I love ending this on such a positive note. And I think Will and I would concur in that it's been, trying to innovate in this industry has been hard over the years because, we are dealing with people's money. We have outdated systems. There's a whole host of reasons. But I think we would agree, because like the reaction that we've had to our map has been astounding, beyond what we could have imagined. But I think it's in part, it's the timing. I think you're right. People are ready. They know they want to do better. They want to, or do more, I should say. And so, yeah, love ending it that way. So, Dan, we really, really appreciate your time. I think we learned so much, and especially take away that, got to come at this from the problem, not the solution. And I would venture to say the car industry might be put on notice. I think after you conquer this industry, maybe that's where you're going next, based on your experience at the counter.
No, I think healthcare is the one most ripe for disruption, but I think that's a bigger animal than I ever want to take on. So
That's a whole other podcast. I have some comments on that too, but you're right. Yeah, maybe the car industry would be easier. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for this joining us on this episode of Decoding Growth. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dan.
thank you.
Decoding growth isn't just talk, it's insight, action, and shared wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, share your insights and join the conversation. Subscribe, rate, review, and spread the word. Thanks for listening. See you next time.